Welcome to episode 278 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm all right, Rob. It's good thing that you've managed to hold on to this first podcast thing because, as we'll discuss in the news, we're starting to become inundated with C++ podcast available.
Yeah, that is very true. We recently had Connor on the show, and him and Bryce are starting one. JF Bastion has a podcast, and of course, there's CVP Chat. So yeah, it's great to have more podcast content out there. I wonder if it's partially because of the pandemic that all these new podcasts are springing up.
I was going to say there's this kind of level of irony happening here, right? Because we've had so many people tell us that they don't have a commute anymore, so they don't have time to listen to CppCast. But since they're all home, I guess they have time to create their own podcast or something.
Seems that way. Okay, well, at the top of every episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. This week, we got this tweet from Oliver Waga. I apologize if I pronounced his name wrong. We've had him on the show before. But he wrote, wait. Video on YouTube? When did that start? I've just been doing the audio from the website. And this was in response to me linking last week's episode, which we do publish on YouTube as well. And yeah, I don't know how Oliver missed this, but yeah, we've been posting and recording video in addition to the audio for like the past year and a half, maybe?
At least, yeah, something like that. And that was the specific request from a listener who said that they can comprehend better if they can actually see people talking. Right. And so we've tried to meet that when we can.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the show. You can always reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or email us at feedback@cppcast.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or subscribe on YouTube. Joining us today is Andreas Kling. Andreas has been writing open source C++ for the last 15 years, working on projects like KDE, Qt, and WebKit. Nowadays, he puts all of his free time into SerenityOS, a new Unix-like operating system with the look and feel of a 90s office computer. Everything from kernel to web browser is done in-house in modern C++, and he frequently posts videos of his programming sessions to YouTube and wants to share a joy of programming with the world. Andreas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, that's an interesting background. KDE, Qt, and WebKit, were those all just hobby projects, or were any of that paid work?
KDE was a hobby project, and then I got picked up by Nokia, so I spent 2 years there working on Qt, or Qt as we call it, right. And then I went to Apple and did WebKit for 6 years.
Wow.
So, but since then I've left the big tech industry. Nowadays I'm in the small tech industry in Sweden, chilling out.
So we'll talk more about your project SerenityOS in a minute, but I am curious if you still use KDE as your main desktop environment when you're running Linux.
I do not know. I use Mate on Linux.
Mate? Which one is that?
That's the, I guess the continuation of the GNOME 2 project.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm familiar with that now. Yeah. I was so enamored with KDE back in the early 2000s. I would run it all over the place. And then I realized at some point, and this, I don't mean this is a knock at all to the KDE project because it's a very impressive project. I just wanted my desktop environment to be simpler. So I just have XFCE everywhere now because that's just all I need. Yeah. Anyhow,
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah. That's kind of the same thing that drives me to use Mate instead. Like, I just want a very simple desktop.
Right. Well, anyhow, that a random aside.
Oh, that's cool. All right, Andreas. Well, we'll start talking about SerenityOS in just a minute. But first, we got a couple news articles to discuss, so feel free to comment on any of these, okay?
Sure.
All right, and the first one is that Qt or Qt 6.0 has been released. I think we mentioned that the beta for it was out a couple weeks or months ago. But the whole, the final release or the first release of Qt 6.0 is out now. And this blog post goes over some of the big changes that they made between Qt 5 and Qt 6. I didn't realize how long Qt 5 has been the main release. I think it said it was like 7 years since
Over
Qt 5
years,
was released,
yeah.
or was it 8 years? Yeah.
Yeah, it was back when I was still at Nokia. We put that out.
Yeah, I mean, and we've brought up Qt 6 a couple of times because I believe this also now brings with it the new license thing that had some people concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But one thing I wasn't aware of is it looks like they're making some big changes to the way they do graphics in Qt 6. Qt 5, I believe, was all OpenGL, and now they're trying to use Metal and Vulkan and Direct 3D. So I'd imagine you could get much more performant graphics out of Qt 6.
Yeah, that's supposed to be one of the selling points of Qt 6, is that they've sort of unified their rendering abstractions to take better advantage of platform APIs. So nowadays it should be like on top of Metal and Vulkan and all those things, right? And of course, also it's updated for C++ 17, I think, is what they targeted.
That one I find particularly interesting because, I mean, it's been a while since I've dug into the Qt source, but every time I have to like, as you see at the top of the file, like if Qt namespace, and then it pound defines what the namespace opening would be there, and then down at the bottom again, whatever. And I'm like, okay, with C++ 17, have they just acknowledged that compilers now do support namespaces and have gotten rid of those macros, or are those still an option depending on what the user needs?
Oh, I don't know. I always figured those were for people who wanted to explicitly namespace the Qt library for themselves. So they wanted to like move it all out of the global namespace.
Well, you've actually worked on these projects. I was always under the impression it was because they still supported, like GCC 2.0 or whatever back in the day, and it didn't have namespaces yet.
Okay, I can't give an authoritative answer on that actually, but I do remember that we had an absurd number of compilers and operating systems we supported back when I was there, like AIX and stuff like that.
Right. Well, I mean, the ability to pull it into your own namespace could definitely be helpful depending on what you're doing, particularly if you have, because things happen in the real world, have to have two different versions of Qt in your project or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Next thing we have is a YouTube series that has started up somewhat recently, and this is how to make an operating system using C++. And Andreas, I thought you'd be interested in this one. It looks like you're not the only one working on a C++ operating system out there.
No, indeed. I watched the first video, and it looked like a nice little introductory tutorial to get started with something like that. I tend to focus more on like the what comes long after the introductory stuff myself. So there's not too much overlap with what I do. But it is nice to see that people are starting to realize that, hey, you can build operating systems with C++. Because, for the longest time, there's been this meme almost that if you're going to do a kernel, you're going to do it in C, right? And
right.
People are starting to wake up to using other languages, which is nice.
Yeah.
For our listeners' sake, too, I think if you're interested at all in that video series, it appears that the author has given you something of a template to get started with EFI, boot code, and that kind of thing. So for people who have been curious about how to get that kind of thing going, you might check out those templates at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like a good place to get started.
Yeah. Okay, and then, Jason, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show when we were reading feedback, there is a new podcast out, and this is from Phil Nash and Anastasia from JetBrains, and their first Zero is out now. It's called No Diagnostic Required.
Yeah, how did we miss that opportunity, by the way? We didn't do CppCast episode. Well, I wasn't involved, but you started with episode 1 instead of episode 0,
That's
right?
true. That was a big mistake. Yeah.
And it was a huge mistake also for C++ Weekly. I started with episode 1 instead of episode 0, and I didn't even count in hex. Like, I don't know, like. Anyhow.
So this means Phil is doing 2 different podcasts now, because Phil does CPP chat with John Culp still,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Busy guy.
I'll be curious personally to see how consistently, regularly they get these released.
Mm-hmm.
And I know because I watched this episode that Anastasia is still listening to CppCast, so she'll probably hear me saying, I wonder how consistently they're going to release these. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last thing I want to mention is C++ 20 has officially been published, and you can now actually go and buy or download the full PDF of the C++ 20 document. I think you can also still find the working draft if you don't want to spend like $200 to buy the PDF. But it is available. It's great to see that it made it in before the end of 2020.
Yeah, 2 weeks to spare.
Yeah.
I like to refer to it as costing 200 units of money because depending on the exchange, I mean, it's officially 198 Swiss francs, but depending on the exchange rate at the moment, within margin of error, it's about $200, 200 euro, 200 francs. Yeah, whatever, it's fine.
Yeah. Are you going to buy a copy, Jason?
No.
Okay. Download that working draft, though?
Yes, I don't know how many copies I already have of the working draft on my desktop here. What about you, Andreas? Any comment here?
I'm just going to wait and see what comes out in compilers.
Yes.
I tend to find it easier to actually learn by testing stuff out myself, right? So I don't really get that much from reading those specs or standards.
Yeah, I only read it kind of like if I have to, like if compilers disagree or something or whatever, yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, well, Andreas, we mentioned in your bio that you work on SerenityOS. Could you start off by telling us a little bit more about what it is?
Well, sure. So Serenity, or SerenityOS, is a new desktop operating system that I started writing in modern C++. And I started the project in 2018 after completing a 3-month-long drug rehab. And I came out of there and I didn't really know what to do with myself and all of my free time that I was now supposed to fill with something else. And I'd always kind of wondered what it might be like to build an operating system. So I just started poking around with some bits and pieces. And it wasn't really an operating system at first. It was an ELF executable loader and a ext2 file system parser and a little GUI library with an event loop I was making with SDL. And at some point I realized that, hey, if I just put a kernel underneath this, it will be kind of like an operating system.
just slap a kernel underneath it.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So that's how the Serenity operating system was born. And I named it after the Serenity prayer, which I had learned at rehab. And I wanted a name that would always remind me to stay on that healthy path. Back then, I was always worried about relapsing into bad behaviors and stuff. So I wanted to build sort of these accountability mechanisms for myself. So that's why I named the system that way. And it also led me to start uploading videos to YouTube of myself programming and just kind of stream of consciousness talking while doing it. And I figured that I had been sort of hiding my whole life. And I thought that if I just put myself out there and show my face on the internet, then maybe that will help me not hide so much anymore. And it worked out pretty well. So over time, people started finding the system and finding my YouTube channel. And somebody posted it to Hacker News. And then there were all these people coming in. And it was pretty overwhelming. My inbox was a disaster. And I still have mails from them I didn't answer to. But the response to the system has been really great because I guess it has this kind of scrappy can-do attitude that I wanted to build everything myself and not take in any outside dependencies. So the system is completely standalone other than the compiler.
I was going to say, compiler? Okay.
Not yet, anyway. Yeah, so that's what the system is basically. And originally it was just me for the first 6 months or so, but then people started finding it and I don't know, they found something they liked about it and they wanted to participate. So people started sending in patches and I think we've now had about 225 individual contributors or something like that. And with about 15 or 16 of them with more than 100 commits. So it's a fairly active project today, and it's going really well.
So how long has it been since you actually started it again, if you don't mind?
So I started it in October 2018. So okay. It's 2 years and 2 months, something like that.
When did you say it got posted to Hacker News?
That was in April of 2019.
April 2019,
so,
okay.
Yeah, so the first 6 months I was just under the radar.
Right.
Just me committing and then people found it.
I find these kind of, overnight success stories interesting where usually there's at least 6 months to 5 years of hard work, and then someone finds out about it, and then it's an overnight success, basically. But
Yeah, I think that's usually how it goes. There was a lot of unglamorous nights in front of the computer, obviously, to bring it to where it was after those 6 months. But I think something that spoke to people immediately was that I had a video presentation I had made just a couple of days prior to it showing up on Hacker News, so it was very easy to just link that, and everybody could see the system running. And I guess it was a bit farther ahead than you would normally see sort of hobby operating systems, so captured people's imagination a little bit. And I also kind of think that almost all of us have some sort of love for that late 90s graphical aesthetic, because we all used Windows at one point or another in those days, and it has a special place in our hearts. So I think that spoke to people a lot.
And do you do your YouTube videos live stream? Is that what you said, or do you do them pre-recorded?
They're pre-recorded, but I don't edit them, so
Effectively live stream.
Yeah, effectively. So when I first started doing it, I didn't have a good internet connection, so I actually had to record my videos and then drive into town, go to the library, and then upload there. I was doing that the first couple of months.
Wait, you said this was 2018, right? I just want to make sure I got the calendar right here.
Yes, it was. But I had rented a cabin over the winter, so I was in this kind of remote location, and I would just drive into town to upload. It was a simpler time.
The backstory that you shared is fascinating to me. So it sounds like it has worked. The operating system has been a distraction of sorts, or a way for you to put your time and energy for you for the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's been really good. I didn't know what to expect, so I figured I would just try a bunch of things and see what would stick. And turns out that it sticks pretty well. Cool. If you just put your heart and soul into something.
Awesome.
Have a kind of related story, but a friend who didn't realize he was an alcoholic until he started working out, basically. And then that became his avenue for getting out of his alcoholism. Finding a place to put his energy.
That'll motivate you right away if you're working out, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, so you've been working on the project for about 2 years now, and you said it's kind of come along a long way. What's kind of the current state of it, and what's on the horizon, so to speak?
So the current state of it is that we have it's a multitasking Unix-like operating system that boots into a GUI, very similar looking to Windows 2000 or Mac OS 9, something like that. And it has a whole bunch of different desktop applications. We have, file management, image viewing, stuff like that, but also a web browser, which I guess is the biggest individual application we're working on. And it's not like we're focusing on any one individual part of the system at the same time. It's more like very spread out, and each piece is moving forward a little bit at a time, and then we switch between the different pieces. So it's hard to get a grip on it if you're not like actively participating in the development. But I personally find it very impressive and very beautiful, but I'm also very biased. But it's very nice. It's gotten a lot more stable in the last couple of weeks, especially since some new people have come in and started taking an interest in working on some of the kernel stuff, like synchronization primitives and stuff like that, and improving stuff there. Because a lot of that was very slapped together by me, just trying to get to the next thing.
I think that's the kind of thing, if you're not an expert in it, getting it right is very difficult.
Yeah, right. But it turns out that you can usually get something working pretty well, and then if you're just enthusiastic enough, then eventually you'll attract someone else and they'll come and do it properly. So that's been really great. And there's a lot of really great people working on the project as well, so it's definitely not just me. I think we're about maybe 20, 25 people actively working on it. And everybody has sort of found their own little niche or their own little corner that they are particularly excited about in the system. So we have somebody who's building a shell for it, and we have somebody else working on the kernel. Somebody's really excited about JavaScript spec compliance, and everybody sort of finds their own thing to do with it. And I like to keep this philosophy that as long as people are doing the thing that they're specifically interested in, then that's when we get the best software. So I don't try to steer anybody to work on any specific thing, but just let everybody do what they want. And somehow, magically, it comes together nicely in the end. At least I hope so.
I didn't realize... Oh, sorry, Rob.
No, go ahead.
I didn't realize until we were preparing for this episode that you were working on SerenityOS, and I actually have a friend who has been contributing for the last few weeks who has some spare time at the moment. And his niche that he has found is going in and making things context capable that could be.
Ah, that would be Lenny.
That would be Lenny, yes. He's also been on the podcast.
Yeah, he's been doing a great job at that. And it's lovely. It's like one of those things that's clearly helpful and beneficial, but you need that person to come in and be super excited about it to just go and do it everywhere. And then it's really awesome when that person shows up. So very happy about Lenny.
Well, he said that it's been a very fun experience because, like you were saying, as long as the code is clean or whatever and provides some benefit, you accept it. It seemed to be his impression. So.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see any reason to not let people roam free, especially when we don't have any dependencies and we control everything sort of under the same umbrella. It's very easy to iterate on something, even if it's not perfect. When it comes in, we can iterate, right? And I find that like fast iteration, it makes people have more fun with it. Of course, we're still in sort of a honeymoon phase. I realize that if at some point this becomes something that we have to make releases of, we might have to calm down a little bit. But we're far from there. So,
what is it like to kind of get started if you're interested in contributing to SerenityOS? I mean, I've never worked on an operating system. Like, I have no idea what type of build time it looks like, what debugging on an operating system looks like. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so to people who are interested in contributing, I always tell them to just build a system and try it out, and then see if you find something broken or something that annoys you, and then just try to fix that. And that turns out to be pretty good, because then everybody just takes their own perspective on it, and they find all kinds of interesting things that I would never have thought were annoying. And I think one thing I would like to do with this project is just expand people's idea of what an operating system is, because to so many people, an operating system is a kernel, right? And I think there's so much more to it than that. So I come from a background in KDE, and I also worked on macOS and iOS at Apple. So for me, an operating system is really like the whole stack, like the kernel, the shells, the userland utilities, and all the GUI and everything there. So that's how we're building SerenityOS. So it really does have everything from the kernel to the like the JavaScript engine in the web browser and the PNG, JPEG decoders, and all that stuff. So whatever you would want to work on, it probably has a space and a place in the system. Since we're doing it this way, we're also able to use the same sort of libraries for everything. So that works out pretty nicely as well, because once you become familiar with some part of the system, then you can bring a lot of that comfort with you to any other part. So one of the funnest things for me to see as sort of the spider in the project is to see somebody coming in, working on their little specific thing, and then they just branch out suddenly and jump from JavaScript to kernel. And people are just pushing far outside their comfort zone because the project allows them to do that. So yeah, if you wanted to work on it, you could do literally anything.
So
it would probably fit.
Your
No, go
JavaScript
ahead.
engine, your libpng, your JPEG parser, you're saying all of that is from scratch internally.
That's right. Yeah, all of it.
Wow.
And I started most of the libraries and stuff, but not all of them. So by now, a lot of other people have started new libraries for it as well, which is really nice because then I don't have to feel as responsible for everything that breaks all the time. That was it was a bit difficult early on. They're like, whatever was broken, it was always my fault.
Right.
But we've moved on from there. Now it's maybe like 60% of the time it's my fault. But yeah.
Okay. What hardware are you able to run Serenity on?
Oh, that's a good question. So the short answer is I don't really know because I haven't tried that much hardware. We tend to do most of the development on emulators just because it's so convenient, especially for iterating on stuff like kernel changes. And since the system is so fast to boot, like it boots in a split second, you can even work on a GUI application and not feel sort of restricted by the fact that you have to boot a VM every time you change a single line of code because you can be back in that GUI like in a few seconds, even after a rebuild of the whole kernel. So most of the development happens on emulators. So the hardware we support really well is whatever QEMU emulates, essentially.
Okay.
And VirtualBox and VMware. I think some people got it running there. But then at the same time, a bunch of people are enthusiastic about this, and they have gotten the system running on their random PC boxes that they cobbled together. And just a couple of days ago, someone in the community started working on a hardware compatibility list for the system where he's just like adding the individual pieces of hardware that he got it to boot on. So it's a very short list so far, but I guess we're looking forward to expanding on it. It is very, very lacking in terms of hardware drivers. Like it's not an area that we have put much effort into at all. Almost all the effort has been on building out like a user land and just the core of a kernel. But something I find very interesting about this project is that while all of the code is original and new, we're using almost all of the abstractions. All the abstractions that we're using are almost all like tried and true and proven abstractions, right? So we're using a POSIX-like kernel, and we have sort of event loop-driven GUI and all these things. So we know that you can build software this way. So you can go and build something halfway in the kernel, and then as long as you can move to user land and keep building there, you don't have to finish everything perfectly in the kernel. So you can sort of move in between the different abstraction layers. You don't have to finish everything. So that has been really helpful for building the stack vertically. And then sort of someone comes in later and says, oh, wait a minute, there's a corner case in the futex here. And they can go and spend a week trying to figure that out. But it didn't stop the development of a web browser.
So you've got a file system. You said it started out as ext2.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And you said someone's working on a shell. So is there a working shell at the moment?
Yeah. We have a working shell and working terminal emulator and everything. So we even have a telnet server, and you can telnet into it, although it's a little bit shaky sometimes because there are some issues with the TCP implementation. So if you stay on your telnet session for too long, it might get a little flaky. But it grows more stable over time as more people use it. We're kind of shaking out the problems. And something that has been really cool recently is we started fuzzing a lot of the system. So
I was so going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So obviously in a greenfield C++ project, fuzzing is going to find problems, right? So
yeah,
it was not super surprising to us when it did. And people started building fuzzers, and the way we do it is that we build parts of the system on Linux, and then we fuzz those parts there.
Okay.
And that allows us to integrate with, now we're on this Google Cloud fuzzing thing, OS as fuzz.
Uh-huh.
So they are continuously fuzzing a whole bunch of our libraries, and we can easily add more by just tweaking a build script on our end. So that has already sussed out like a couple of dozen bugs in our parsers and image decoders and stuff like that.
That's what was going to ask about the image decoders.
Yeah. Yeah. Turns out that broken image binary formats are just very fuzzer friendly. But hopefully we found all the basic bugs at least, but we still have a backlog. And one thing I think that we did maybe a little bit unusually compared to other users of OSS Fuzz is that when they added us, I asked them to just make all the issues public. Because we don't really have releases, so we don't care if everybody can see what our bugs are, and they were not really equipped to make issues public. So now we still have to like add everybody's email if they should be able to see the issues. That's something I hope might change someday, because we have nothing to hide. Like, we're not ashamed of our bugs. We just want to fix them.
Yeah, that sounds like something that a lot of open source projects would want to be public, I feel like. I mean, maybe not all, because, like Libpng, I feel like this is one of these where if there's a security flaw in its parser, then the internet breaks, right? Like literally every device is susceptible at that point. So maybe that shouldn't be public, but on a case-by-case basis anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're just erring on the side of caution with this. It's easier to selectively open than it is to retroactively try to close it down once something comes out.
Right. So can the operating system host the compiler itself? Like if I'm working on the web browser, do I compile inside of Serenity or do I compile outside of Serenity?
So you compile outside, but we do have a working port to GCC and the bin utils and everything, so you can compile inside the system if you want to. It's just so much more convenient to use my IDE outside still.
Right. Oh, you haven't ported CLion or whatever over?
No, I'm building my own IDE. It's called Hack Studio.
Okay.
And I'm trying to make it comfortable to work in, but some things are just so nice. I use QCreator as my IDE, and the like auto completion C++ support is just really good.
Right.
Yeah. So until we have a C++ parser, it's just unlikely to be as comfortable working inside the system. So for like long-running development tasks, I tend to be outside. But I've done a couple of sort of stunt videos where I just spend 45 minutes in the system building out something. So I did a breakout game in Hack Studio a couple of weeks ago from scratch, like working in the system the whole time. And that worked out pretty well. It's weird to write C++ without autocomplete, but I hope I don't have to get too used to it.
That's funny because I've only just very recently started using IDEs for my C++ development, so I'm used to not having autocomplete. Sometimes I feel like it gets in my way.
Yeah, I can relate. I used to be that way too, and at some point I got comfortable. I think it was like whenever you have to learn some new library quickly, then it's just so nice to have autocomplete when you don't quite remember all of the APIs and stuff, and you don't remember the parameter order.
Right. Totally agree.
So you talked a little bit about fuzz testing. Do you do any other testing on Serenity? Do you have unit tests set up, integration tests, anything like that?
Sure. Yeah. So we have a bunch of unit tests that we run. We're using the GitHub Actions for our continuous integration. So the shameful thing is that we're still not actually booting the system to run the tests, but we're compiling all of the unit tests for Linux and then running them there.
Okay.
But we're still able to cover like a large part of the code base. And since it is a POSIX system, it is, pretty easy to move code back and forth. And we have been putting some effort towards making the kernel testable as well. And it's like we have all of the pieces, but we need somebody to hunker down and actually put them together and make the tests run. That is definitely something that we we need to do at some point. But it sort of goes back to my philosophy of having everybody work on the thing that they feel is the most interesting. So just kind of waiting for somebody to pick that up.
So is that the philosophy then that you maintain for yourself when you go to do your programming session for the day? You just work on whatever sounds interesting at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I would rather make a video of myself building some insignificant GUI detail and being really enthusiastic about it,
right,
than to try to force myself to do something really interesting or advanced, right? So sometimes it's just me like, oh, I'm going to add a line between these two GUI elements here, and welcome to the video about that. But I mean, I try to make it a little bit non-trivial, but sometimes it tries to be an honest depiction of what I actually do, right? And something that is important to me is to keep a high quality of graphical interface. That's always something I've felt is lacking in the Linux world, that the GUI is very sort of fragmented and it's hobbled together from parts that use different frameworks, and there's no like cohesive vision feeling to it. And especially from a background in KDE and macOS and iOS, there's this extreme cohesion. So I'm trying to bring that into SerenityOS as well. So everything is written in the same way, in the same style, tries to look the same, feel the same. I think it makes the whole feel more like this, more than, what is the expression? Like more than the sum of its parts.
More than the parts. The sum is more. Wait.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a difficult one. Whatever that is, that's what I'm going for.
Did we ask yet what version of C++ is Serenity written in?
No, you didn't. So it's written in C++ 20, I would say, but our use of C++ 20 features is kind of limited just because we didn't like start busting them out yet. But since we have no dependencies and nobody really depends on us, we can just stay on the bleeding edge of the compiler. And we're using GCC 10.2 at the moment, which is their latest release. So
yeah, 11 will be out soon.
Yep, looking forward to it. We recently started using a little bit of concepts to constrain some stuff, which was nice. And then it broke building on Mac because some people build on Mac with Clang, and then there was some whole thing with that didn't quite support what we wanted to do. So there's that tiny little constraint with some people wanting to build on Mac, but hopefully Clang will catch up release-wise soon. We can stop worrying about that. But yeah, we're using C++ 20, although I personally haven't looked too much into what's actually available. I know the big stuff like the spaceship operator that everybody is excited about, and I like the idea of modules. I'm just waiting to see what it actually looks like when it comes out. Mm-hmm. And concepts have been useful so far, but we'll see. I don't know. Are you guys excited about some particular part of C++ 20?
The main thing that I find being helpful to my code is concepts at the moment. But yeah, getting something that doesn't ice either GCC or Clang, once you get it on one or the other, can be difficult depending on what you're doing. I wouldn't be surprised at all if you have some C++ 20 constexpr code in there from what Lenny was doing.
Oh, that's very possible, yeah. And another thing, we've also been using templated lambdas in some places.
Okay.
Which I didn't even realize was a C++ 20 feature until Clang Tidy, I think it was, told me that it's not supported, and I had to figure out why.
Nice.
What do you find is, as someone who has experience working in KDE, I guess just what do you find most different about working in a C++ operating system compared to, working on a Linux C operating system?
I guess the transparency of it all. Because when I worked on KDE, I always felt like there was like a hard floor where I couldn't really see below it. Because I didn't look much into the kernel. I didn't look much into X11, right? Because they were...
probably.
Yeah, maybe. Very possible. But nowadays, now that I know the whole stack, it does give me a lot of confidence to maneuver in ways that I never really felt like I could before. So we've been building some quite nice vertical integration stuff that we're able to do because we control the kernel and the window compositor and everything, right? So, for example, we've adopted the Darwin style purgeable memory, which is this mechanism where you can have a piece of memory that you can mark as volatile, and then the kernel is free to yoink it away from you at any time. And if you mark it as non-volatile, then the kernel will leave it alone. So it allows you to sort of manage caches of large memory objects and sort of tell the kernel about when you need it and when you don't. And we're using that to great effect in our windowing system, for example, as window backing stores. So if a window is completely obscured by another window, then we can make that window backing store, the obscured one, we can make it volatile. And if the kernel is running low on memory, it can just go and take that memory away from that window, and the windowing system doesn't have to know anything about it. And it turns into a very nice memory optimization and a responsiveness optimization. And I would never have known how to do something like that while working on KDE because it needs like tight vertical integration, like all the way down to the kernel, right?
So you do have a regular job also at the moment?
Yes, I do. I work on industrial networking hardware at a little research lab in Sweden. So we're doing some experimental 5G products for the industrial customers. But it's a small tech industry, not the big one. Or the industry is big, but the tech is small.
Right. Do you find that this operating system development is influencing your regular work at all?
I guess in the way that it makes me feel fearless. Like knowing how to build a whole stack for myself, it gives me confidence to poke and prod at any part of another stack. So nowadays, if I wonder something about how does Linux handle this, I feel much more confident going into the Linux kernel and looking what they actually do, right? Because although the SerenityOS kernel is much less mature and not designed in the same way, it's still like that familiarity allows me to reason about what they're doing, and that has made some things a lot easier to understand.
Is there any part of the SerenityOS that you cannot write in C++?
Sure, yeah. You never quite get away from inline assembly when you're doing an operating system because you just have to interact with the CPU at some point. But there's surprisingly little of it. There's stuff like entering into a syscall or setting up the stack for signal handlers and stuff like that. Like this really, really low-level CPU-specific stuff. But it's not too much. And we kind of suffering from the same problem that early Linux had, that we targeted x86 processors. So the whole thing is sort of built around x86 concepts. And at some point we realized that, well, that's not great if we want to expand to other architectures. And now we have to start abstracting things, but it's not too bad.
Is that something someone's working on right now?
You could loosely call it working on, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's sure, yeah. It's something that's moving slowly forward somehow.
That was just an idle curiosity of mine, is what would be involved to get it ported to ARM or something like that. But it sounds like, yeah, you're trying to figure that out right now, basically.
Yeah, well, I can say that somebody has sent me a diff of a working ARM port that boots the kernel on ARM, but it was in very bad shape, and then the person disappeared. So he just said, "Hey, this boots on ARM," and then I didn't hear from him about that again. But maybe he'll be back. It didn't look terribly complicated, but it also didn't look terribly functional. So we'll see.
Right.
I know you said
yeah.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, I know you said you encourage, people to just try out the project, try building it, see if they find something that interests them. But are there any specific areas of Serenity that you're hoping to find more contributors to work on?
Not really. I'm just happy if people find something that they're interested in working on. If it takes us 10 years to get this thing into shape, then that's the time it takes. I would rather take a long time building it and having fun the whole time than trying to herd people into building the right thing at the right time.
Okay.
Do you have a Doom port yet?
Definitely. Of course. We have Quake too.
Doom is like notoriously easy to port to new operating systems, so I've been surprised if you didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Although we don't have sound for Doom.
Is that because you don't have sound, or because Doom port doesn't have sound?
The Doom port that I ported didn't have sound support.
Oh.
And I didn't look super closely at how to do that. And then we got Quake running, so that has sound. And then I kind of forgot about Doom.
Okay.
Yeah, sound is one of those things that I didn't know anything about sound before starting on Serenity, and I still know almost nothing about sound programming. So I had to learn a lot just to get that running at all. That's been fascinating. I'm definitely learning so much on this project. Like, I don't want to give anyone the impression that I know how to do all these things, because I don't. Like, I'm discovering as I run headfirst into the next thing what it actually entails and what's required. And I'm just so used to being in over my head at this point that it feels normal.
What is that process like? Because, you're building all these low-level libraries on your own. So how do you go about figuring, how do I write Libpng from scratch,
Yeah, okay. So Libpng, I just started by getting the PNG spec, and I made a 1x1 pixel white PNG, and then I just started writing code until I could load it.
Okay.
And then once that worked, then I made a larger PNG, and then I made one that had an alpha channel and so on, and then eventually it was so good that I tried to download a PNG and load it, and of course it crashed. And turns out that PNG has all these different interesting features, but really it's a very incremental process of just trial and error and learning, and having this sort of willingness to do something in a bad way or the wrong way at first, and just persevering and improving it incrementally. And that's something I always try to encourage in people too. And part of what I try to do with my YouTube channel is to show people that even with experience, you don't necessarily know how to do something properly the first time. You can sketch out a crappy version of something and make it work, and then start iterating on it, right? So most of the system has been built in that way, and just doing it in some crappy way that works, and then figuring out what's the nice way of doing this.
What's the name of your YouTube channel, by the way? I don't think we've mentioned that yet.
My YouTube channel is my name, so Andreas Kling. It's just youtube.com/Andreas Kling. They chose the name for me based on my Google username.
Right. Just wanted to make sure our listeners, since we've mentioned it like 5 times now, could find it if they wanted to.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for reminding me.
So I want to come back to the browser, if you don't mind, because
Sure.
I mean, like, I just actually did a somewhat tongue-in-cheek Twitter poll where I said, what operating system do you run? And I listed, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, right? Because our web browsers are, I would say it's easy for me to believe that a web browser is actually more complicated than your operating system, right? Like, because they've got so many things that they have to do, at least if you include all of the PNG libraries and all that JavaScript engine and everything in there. Sure. I'm just curious what status it's at. How well does it work, and whatever.
Okay, so the status is that it is a basic CSS2 implementation.
Okay.
So it's pretty far behind in terms of modern CSS features, but it has bits and pieces from more modern specs at the same time. So it's not like we targeted any individual spec. It's more like, hey, let's try to load Reddit and see what breaks. And then add whatever is necessary and then move on to the next website. So it's very organic. Like anything that takes in data from the outside, we build organically by just throwing data at it and then hacking until it works, and then sort of try to retroactively come up with good abstractions afterwards, after we get something working. So, but it is a decently competent HTML and CSS engine. It can do basic pages, like you can go and load a media wiki or Reddit page or something like that. But it has very, very noticeable layout flaws. Things don't line up the way they're supposed to, and margins and padding and everything is off everywhere. But these are all things that we can iterate on and fix, right? And the JavaScript engine it's very slow. We're still focusing on just bringing up all of the language features. So we don't have a JIT or anything like that. It's just a straight interpreter. But it parses and runs a fairly large part of ECMAScript with some pieces, some big new features are missing, like await async promises, stuff like that. But it's just waiting for somebody to pick it up and say, oh, I'm going to make promises work. And JavaScript is probably the best tested feature we have, because something that happened was I started building the browser without a JavaScript engine, and people kept asking me, are you going to add a JavaScript support to this browser? And I would just always sort of ignore the question. But at some point I realized, okay, maybe it's hard to build a JavaScript engine, but I should probably try, because how hard can it really be, right? So I just made a video of me starting to sketch that out. So I just hand wrote an AST in a video and then made an interpreter walk the AST and run the code. And something happened to some of my viewers that were JavaScript developers, that they became super excited because they saw that, wait a minute, you can build a JavaScript engine? And they wanted to participate in that. So a lot of the libjs engine that we have has been written by people who were originally like web developers, but then they just got so interested in this that they wanted to learn more about it and participate in the construction of a new JS engine.
Wow.
And
cool.
Yes, it's been really awesome to see people come out of their shell as developers and sort of expand what they thought they could do. And they also brought a lot of nice JS experience, because I don't have a lot of JS experience. So they've built this really nice unit testing framework for us, and they keep adding these really nice tests when they make engine changes. And they put me to shame, because I write these simple little unit tests to test like the one thing I'm changing, and they're coming around with these 100-line tests. But that's very good.
Wow. Sounds like potentially a lot of fun. I'm hoping some of our listeners have said, oh, wow, I've always wanted to do, whatever. I know when Rob asked you where you're looking for help, and you said you don't really want to guide anyone in a particular direction, maybe if I could try rephrasing that question, saying you've mentioned lots of things the operating system has. Is there anything that it does not have at all yet?
Yeah, many things. It doesn't have PNG writer, for example. We can't save PNGs. It doesn't have a C++ parser for our IDE, so we could do code completion there.
PDF support?
It doesn't have PDF support. And it does not have many hardware drivers at all. It has no MP3 decoder. And
MP3 decoder, that could be fun.
That might be fun, right? It has no way to play Spotify music, which I would personally like.
What about...
Don't know what goes into that, but just saying.
OpenGL or any kind of 3D capabilities?
None whatsoever, yeah. There's a huge area there that you could get into. It also doesn't have stuff like 64-bit support in the kernel, so we run the CPU in 32-bit mode at the moment.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Just because it was what I was familiar with when I started the project, so I just wrote it out that way. And it's one of those things that people ask about, like, hey, when are you going to add 64-bit support? And the answer is same as to every other question, which is when somebody picks it up, right? Right.
Okay.
But yeah, it really is open. And just because I can't think of something that's missing doesn't mean that you can't.
Right. Maybe that gave some listeners some ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Andreas, it's been really great having you on the show today. It sounds like a really fun project, and thank you for kind of opening up about what brought you to start work on this project. It's a great story.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to share.
Awesome.
And where can people find you online?
So I'm on Twitter as AwesomeKling because Andreas Kling was taken. And you can find the operating system on SerenityOS.org.
All right. Thanks, Andreas.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.